Hi everyone, welcome to the Brown History Podcast. My name is Essen and you are listening to episode 42. Today we'll be discussing legendary film director Satyajit Ray with our guest today, the award-winning film critic Meenakshi Shedde. This episode was possible thanks to the Toronto Film Festival and a special thanks to Nandita Datta from Toronto Film Festival. Right now they have a really cool program going on where they're showcasing a bunch of movies by Satyajit Ray in their original formats and other movies that aren't by Ray but are connected to him. And it's all being curated by Meenakshi, so it's very cool to have her on today. Now, if you haven't watched any of Satyajit Ray's movies, don't worry, you won't get lost. It's going to be a great episode and we're going to start now. So here we go. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Hassan. I'm just absolutely honored and delighted to join you.
So how did you end up being a critic then, and that too an award-winning one?
I don't know. I think I've never been somebody who had a big plan in life or, to achieve X, Y, Z, big things by the end of 5 or 10 years. Or I didn't have that kind of career goals, really. I've been ambitious, but not in a specific, this is what I want to achieve way, but ambitious in the sense of, I'm very alert about opportunities floating by. They float by a lot of people, but a lot of people are not alert that it's an opportunity. And that is what I've been a little bit alert about, aware. So I actually primarily am a journalist and a film critic. And so there are these, a few gurus who really brought me on this path. So one is Amrit Gangar, who's a film historian, scholar, critic, curator. He used to run something called Screen Unit. When I was in college, and he showed us the greats of world cinema, and these were all lugging 35mm prints in cans in those days. And so he would make these cyclo-style notes, and there was a lot of addabaji after the screenings in a little Irani joint, where endless cups of tea. And I think those were my richest film school, because I never really studied film at a university or something. It's mainly from the love of cinema. I did a film appreciation course at the Film and Television Institute of India in Pune in India. But the film criticism is just something I stumbled into. Primarily, I'm a journalist.
Well, it worked out for you.
Yeah. So it started off with my being in the Times of India and seeing these lovely movies. So there's this Mumbai International Film Festival. And I'd see these fabulous movies. They were from Malayalam, in Marathi, in Tamil, in Assamese. And I said, hey, the film critic of Times of India never, ever reviews these gorgeous films. It's only Bollywood or Hollywood. And I said, God, but that's so limiting. It struck me as very, very, very small. A huge and massive industry, of course, fantastic industry and something I respect tremendously. But there's all this other richness which is being royally ignored. And I think I felt the hurt more because I was in the biggest newspaper in India. And I felt I have to do something about it. So I've never had a visiting card saying I'm a film critic, but it's just something I did, like guilty pleasures on the side. But somehow, it led me to this national award for best film critic, which then said, okay, this is it, because that award told me that I had something in me which I had not known of myself. It was just a fun thing that you do on the side for yourself.
Right.
But somehow, very quickly after that, I got invited on the jury at the Berlin Film Festival, then on the jury at Cannes Film Festival, and jury at Venice. And that, again, changed my life because I went as a critic primarily on these juries. But the festival directors, when I met them, they'd say, oh, we know this fantastic stuff from India, but we never have access to it, or we get mountains of trash, and we don't know how to find these jewels. So would you help us? So that's how I started working with Berlin as a programmer. So,
wow.
One thing led to another.
Yeah.
So I'm just immensely grateful for all of life's rich gifts. What can I say?
And now you're in Toronto.
Yeah.
At the Toronto Film Festival.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think, I guess in this generation, a lot of people think that critics are someone who just gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down to a movie. But what really is a critic, and why are they so important to the film world, the film industry?
Good question. Thank you for that. So I think, so there were these people who guided me, as I said. So Amrit Gangar was one, but another was Maithili Rao, who is a fantastic film critic. And there was another person whose name is Iqbal Masood. It was a pen name for F.G. Jilani Saab, we'd call him. These were both critics who didn't actually hold my hand and teach me things, but by what they wrote and who they were, I learned so much. So in Indian mythology, there's a character called Ekalavya who got to be a fantastic archer by watching somebody and treating him as a guru, Dronacharya. But Dronacharya never actually taught him anything as such. But by single-minded devotion to this guru and observing him, he learned a lot. So he always considered him a guru, but the guru may or may not have been aware of this quote unquote student, So I consider these very much my gurus, these two people, and they shaped me because I think what I learned much more than the reductive thumbs up, thumbs down of today's generation is Maithili and actually both of them taught me to see a film in a much larger context. So to see the social context. So you see a film that could be a love story, but you can be aware of a lot of undercurrents which may or may not be very obvious. So for example, what is the cast of the boy and the girl? If it's even just a rom-com, for example, there can be many other layers which are there in the film. Sometimes you read into it, which the director may or may not have intended. But it's all so cinema for me is a very loaded thing, and it's of course each one takes away what they want. But there can be caste things, there can be social issues, there can be economic things, there can be definitely political things, there can be hints of LGBT stuff which is not at all overt. So there's a lot of things which are there, which can be observed, but are not obvious in saying dialogue. I am lower caste, you are high caste, how can I marry you? So it's not going to be so crude as that. But there's a lot of cultural things that can be coded and loaded, and it's for you to have the eyes to see them.
So you're like a guide.
A guide. And I feel it's much more relevant now. For me, a critic has always been relevant, but I feel way more relevant now because I think everybody on this planet is drowning in a sea of information, films, many arts, art exhibitions, this, that, multimedia installations, all kinds of stuff. And even if you just take one streaming site like Amazon or Hulu or Netflix or anything, they've just got thousands of things. Right. And everybody, every morning, like it's tattooed on my forehead, Meenakshi, please tell us what we should see. Mm-hmm. So everybody, me and any other critic as well, everybody's chasing you and begging you, oh, please tell me what I absolutely mustn't miss.
So people are listening. People are more into hearing what you have to say now than before.
Me or any other critic they trust. Yeah, there are zillions of critics, but you know for yourself whom you trust or whose guidance you would go by, or that you try and see a movie that they recommend or avoid a movie that they said was trashy or whatever, right? But so that's a very personal thing. You find your own critic that you can trust. But everyone's always asking me what I like, so that means there's such an overdose of films and series. They want to know what are the good ones, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the relevance is much greater, and I find it fairly shocking that there isn't. I think, frankly, the web, the streaming sites should have. Not they should have, but there should be a critic specially also for streaming sites, because otherwise you just get this AI giving you crap. Oh, you saw one rom-com, it'll drown you with 20 more rom-coms, shitty rubbish, right?
You're getting replaced by an algorithm.
Yeah, your life and your taste and your cultural everything is getting ruled by some stupid machine algorithm. And you're stopping to use your brain and your culture and your own inheritance of what your parents and your culture has given you, because you're going by, oh, cool, another rom-com. Okay. It's kind of the path of least resistance, and it's just a shitty way to go about life, I think.
That's very true, I agree. So today you're here in Toronto for the Toronto Film Festival, and you're curating Satyajit Ray films.
Yeah.
And basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have to choose or curate a bunch of movies by Satyajit Ray and a bunch of other movies that aren't made by Satyajit Ray. And you have to kind of pretty much pick a certain amount of movies from a long list of movies that he made. And basically, what is your goal at the end of the day for your audience to leave with? Like, what is it that you want the audience to understand and know about Satyajit Ray after they watch all these movies that you picked?
Okay, that's a big one. Yeah. But yeah, so it's a great privilege for me to be here. So it's at the Toronto International Film Festival, but it's in a subsect of it called the TIFF Cinematheque, which does the year-round programming. And so the program is called Satyajit Ray, if I were to say it correctly, the Bengali style.
That was my next question.
So Satyajit Ray, his contemporaries and legacy. So actually I thought of an ultra cool title for it, which didn't work for them, but I call it Ray and Up Ray, and I thought it was a very cool pun, but I'm not sure too many would get it, but that's also okay. So basically the idea was, because it's a Satyajit Ray centenary year, it's a year later because of the pandemic, but he's definitely a very important figure to celebrate. But I also wanted to open up the canon somewhat and also include films by his contemporaries, and it was very, very important to me to also talk to the younger generation. Because a lot of the younger generation in India, and I think anywhere in the world, they've heard of Ray, that guy, but I don't think they've seen a single of his films. I've talked to many youngsters, and some of them have heard of them, some have not heard of him. But I've not met a single youngster who's actually seen one of his films, even if it's just lying around on YouTube. So that's what I meant by stuff is there and stuff is available and accessible, but you don't know what is really fantastic, right? So you need a guide, just as we had guides when we were younger, or continue to have to shape our tastes, right?
But with him, it's kind of difficult because you just don't want to entertain your audience or the young generation. There is so much in his movies that you want them to understand and to take away with. And, so how do you go about doing that with only a certain amount? I think you only picked 5 movies or 4 movies. So how do you do that?
Oh, that was really a killer. I mean, my God, my list of Ray favorites are like about 37 because all of his films are so gorgeous. And initially I could curate only 8 and then somehow it finally became 10, which was a big bonus. But so we have 4 films by Satyajit Ray, 4 films by his contemporaries and 2 by relatively younger generation directors. So actually, curating is a bit of a gamble. It's a detective game. It's a total outright gamble as well. So your actual list, your dream list, may be very, very, very far from what you actually get to put out as a curated list in the cinemas, and that's partly because, for example, we opened last night with Charulata, which was Ray's personal favorite as well, and it's a great, very beloved favorite of mine and of many Ray fans, Rai fans, I should say. But I was particularly delighted to collaborate with TIFF, which actually honors 35mm prints. This is a great privilege for me. I was like dying 1,000 deaths of joy from seeing this film on 35mm print, which is impossible in India. There is no cinema in India anywhere that I'm aware of that actually shows 35mm prints. It's totally been phased out. There are no cinemas left anymore which have it. There are no projectors. There is no system to show at all. So there is no access. So for me to even hear that faint crackling of sound on the 35mm print, to see the faint scratches, was such a privilege. It took me back to kind of the cinema of my youth when you would see films on 35. But what we had last night was very special. It was a restored 35mm print from the Academy Film Archives. We also have another one which we show on the weekend of Shatranj Ke Khiladi, which is the chess players, also a restored 35mm print from the Academy Film Archives. So we have 3 or 4 prints like that. And for me, that's a real privilege. And we had a very good house last night. So I was happy that they were able to appreciate. But to return to your question about how to choose. So as I said, the dream list is very far from what you actually get. So in some cases, we want a 35mm print. So where do you get that? And then you want a restored one, which is in really good condition. So that each time your choice gets more and more limited. Sometimes, a lot of the times, the producer's dead and cannot be traced. A lot of films, the producer simply cannot be traced, and you can't show film unless, I like to work clean to get the rights written, paid, all of that stuff. No, a lot of the time, the producer can be traced. He's passed away, but his legatees, the people who inherited the rights are all fighting among each other and can't give you a line saying, yes, you have permission. So there's a lot of behind the scenes. Sometimes you include a film because you think, it might be possible that one of the people from the films can come here as a guest as well, for a Q&A or to present or something. So there are many of these other considerations that come in other than your dream list. So finally, it got chiseled too. So I'm very thrilled. So we have, of course, Charulata, we have Debi, we have Shatranj Ke Khiladi, and one more. What is the last? It'll come back to me in a moment. So there's 4 films by Ray, Nayok. And then we have 4 films by his contemporaries. So we have Shubharna Rekha by Ritik Ghatak. We have Manikal Siddheshwari, who's very avant-garde, experimental, stunning work it is. And, Aparna Sen's Mr. and Mrs. Iyer. Yeah. And then we have 2 films by the younger generation. So Anik Datta, who made a film called Aparajito, on how Satyajit Ray made his first film. It's a 2022 film this year, but it's an exquisite black and white, and it's got this gorgeous kind of silver nitrate-y feel. It feels like it's a 35mm film of that time. And Amit Datta's Nayan Sukh, which is just a magnificent experimental film. Just beautiful work. Also younger generation, yeah.
So let's go back to the history of Ray. How did Ray first get started in movies? And how did, because apparently you just told me that there's a movie about him making his first movie. So there must be a lot of drama and trouble and a very difficult task to do. So what was it? Oh, actually, you know what? Before we ask that question, why don't we talk about what the industry was like at the time when Ray was starting out?
So one of the reasons his film was also remade, his struggle to make his first film was celebrated in Aparajito, which means the undefeated Baunik Datta. Is he? And for me, it was important to include this because this, for me, is really a film that talks to the younger generation and also is a wonderful, very charming entry point into Ray's work. If you haven't seen a Ray film, this is a very charming way because I think most people in their life, whatever profession, you can be a miner, a computer engineer, or architect, dream somehow, oh, one day I'll make a movie. It's just kind of a random kind of dream, which is very common, even if you're not from the arts per se or studying film. So Ray was actually in advertising, and he was just crazy about movies in general. But he also came from a very culturally evolved family. So he belonged to the Brahmo sect, which is a sect of Hindus, which is very cosmopolitan and a very social reformist kind of sect. And you see that addressed in a lot of his films. He's very feminist. He's very he really questions oppressive religious practices and patriarchy and stuff like that, right? Questioning a lot of traditional Hindu values, which he didn't find progressive in his films. But he worked with DJ Kamer, which was a British ad agency. And at some point, they sent him to England for further training. It took like 3 months by ship. And when he went there, he made it a point every single day to see a movie which he'd never get to see back home. So at some point, he'd seen Bicycle Thieves by Vittorio De Sica, which is like this icon of Italian neorealism. And that deeply influenced him. And he said, what? Is it possible to make movies like this? It's low budget. There's no song. There's no hero, heroine. There's no big stars. They're non-actors who are at the heart of the film. The protagonists are non-actors and made in very realistic setting in ordinary houses and streets and not in a studio. No fantastic lighting, nothing. He said, is it possible? So it opened up his eyes to radically different possibilities of filmmaking, which didn't really exist in India at that point. So in fact, that's why Pather Panchali, The Song of the Little Road, his first film, which he made in 1955, it's considered, he's considered a pioneer of what is called the parallel cinema movement, which is the independent art house movement. And the reason it was very radical is he was radically operating outside this very, very, very suffocating Hindi cinema. It wasn't called Bollywood in those days. But a very suffocating template. You got to have a hero, heroine. You got to have romantic action, drama, adventure, 6 songs, and a happy ending, right? The masala formula. Yeah. So that's format. Yeah, exactly. So that's been around for like a century, and it was very suffocating. So the film also talks of his humiliations trying to find a producer and said, what? There's no hero, heroine? Forget it. What? There's no romance? What nonsense? It's about, a little brother and sister growing up in genteel poverty in a little village in rural Bengal. Like, what nonsense? And then it's hilarious because, as the movie Aparajito says, finally his wife, Ray, sold her wedding jewelry to raise the initial funds for him to make a filmmaker.
Wow.
So I love that it acknowledges his wife's role in his career as a filmmaker. But also later she found a friend who went and met some minister who was a relative of a relative who was in the PWD, so the Public Works Department, and finally managed to weasel funds meant for the Siliguri Highway to make a film because the title was Song of the Little Road. So he got highway funds to fund a film to make his first film. So it's very charming. Yeah.
Well, this was also in the 1950s when he made his first movie. And
exactly.
This is 1947 was a few years ago.
It was independence.
Yeah, independence,
yes.
partition. There was the famine.
Yes.
A lot of the royal elites lost their powers, and I think most of them would fund the arts. And now that funding is gone.
Yeah.
So what was it like in a political lens, from a political perspective, for Ray to make a movie at that time?
Wonderful question. So you're absolutely right. So Ray, I think he was moved by a story by a lot of his works were adapted from literature. So was Pather Panchali and a lot of the Oppu trilogy. So I think he went by his instinct of something that he really loved, a story that he really believed in about this brother and sister growing up. So it's a very ordinary story about the joys and sorrows of life and how you can have extreme dignity and great joy even though you might be poor. So it celebrated that, whereas, politically it was put down as a film that was exporting poverty to the West, etc., etc. But I think it did the reverse. It actually showed how much how much dignity you could have and how much joy you could have even though you didn't have much money in a bank or didn't even know what a bank was. So I think it actually did the reverse. But he did address, he and his contemporaries, he made Ashani Sanket later, which won the Golden Bear, which was about the Great Bengal famine. So he did address a lot of these issues, but his contemporary, whom I've also included, we haven't included his, but also Ritik Ghatak, whose Shubarna Rekha we have, which is the golden thread or the golden line. A lot of his work, he was himself very deeply affected by partition of East Bengal. as well as, there were millions of refugees on both sides, in Pakistan and India, as well as on the Bengal side. And a lot of his work dealt with the trauma of partition. But also, I have to say, we have an exquisite film in this, which I'm so proud and so delighted to include. It's called Jago Hua Savera, Day Shall Dawn, by A.J. Kardar, who was then in West Pakistan, but made this film in East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh. This was around 1959. Okay, get this. This was during the occupation years. But he shot it in East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh in 1971. And it's this extraordinary, it was directed by A.J. Kardar. And this extraordinary collaboration between West Pakistan, East Pakistan, and India. So, it's this extraordinarily historic film. So it was made with A.J. Kardar from West Pakistan. Faiz Ahmad Faiz wrote the lyrics, if you please, and the songs.
Wow.
And then there was Khan Ataur Rahman, who was a big Bangladeshi star, and Zahir Raihan, I hope I have the name correct, an assistant director who later became, very accomplished filmmaker himself. Then there was from India, there were many talents. One was Tripti Mitra, who was an actress with IPTA, which was part of the artistic wing of the Communist Party of India. Very accomplished actress. There was Timir Baran, who made the music. There was Manik Bandyopadhyay, on whose book it was based, Podda Nodir Maji, etc. And there were a whole British crew who were the techie guys. So there was a British cinematographer, a sound guy, editor from England. So it was wildly all South Asian international collaboration, and it's an exquisite. For me, it directly draws from the aesthetics and the humanist values of Satyajit Ray, but also Italian neorealism and larger international forces. So for me, it's kind of one of the many shining points of this package.
When Ray released his first debut film, what was the reaction in India, and what was the reaction in internationally?
Right. So it was. Thank you for this very interesting question. So I think initially the same reaction as a producer: what? There's no hero heroine. There's no song and dance. What is this nonsense? Are we going to waste 2 hours on it? Kind of stuff. But there was a kind of lag reaction. I think the initial reaction wasn't bright. But what happened was, this is extraordinary. And it, again, to come back to a point that you raised earlier, it highlighted the role of critics and curators in shaping a filmmaker's career and also audience's taste, right? So actually, there was an extraordinary character called, I think if I get the name right, it's Edgar Kaufman from MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which actually at the time in 1955 had a textile and ornamental arts of India exhibition, for which Kaufman had come to India. And he heard about this guy, Satyajit Ray, making some cool film. There were vibes about it. He went and saw an early cut. It wasn't even finished, a work in progress. He was very impressed and immediately alerted the main curators in New York and said, hey, this is cool stuff going on. And guess what? MoMA actually sent Satyajit Ray finishing funds to make the film, and they debuted the film in MoMA. Wow. And that totally got such a good vibe and a good response, and the critics wrote about it, and that alerted world attention. And the next year, it was shown at the Cannes Film Festival in 1956, where it won the Human Document Award, and then it went on to further fame and glory. But it was MoMA that discovered him. And it's so interesting for me that a curator had the vision for a textile show to say, no, if there's an interesting film, we can, it's not the brief of, Ray wasn't making wasn't making textiles. But to have that vision that, yes, this is celebrating the arts of India. We have textiles, but we can also include a film. And to have the vision and the generosity to send him finishing funds to a guy you've never heard of who wasn't a filmmaker yesterday, right? I think this kind of generosity in the arts just makes so many things. So it changed not only Ray's entire life and career, but it changed the course of Indian cinema, I would say, internationally.
What's ironic is that one of the greatest filmmakers from India was first noticed by Americans.
Yes, exactly.
That's the ironic part of it.
Exactly. So then after that, of course, he became, but
once they say it,
popular in India. Yeah, it's like Ghar Ki Murgi kind of.
Yeah.
But to be honest, so Ray was always an art house independent filmmaker, so he never had mass appeal in that sense. His films were in Bengali and his producers saw him. But this would be, I would imagine, with independent cinemas, most places in the world, not only India and Pakistan or anywhere. It's never, he chose that consciously. He never made masala films. That was not his style at all. But there is a particular, for me, an economics at work in Bengal, specifically in Calcutta specifically, where independent art house films can become commercially viable because they have that audience that is so culturally evolved that makes it possible to kind of recover money even over a period of time, if not immediately. So that's how he was able to sustain such a prolific career of 37 films and being, director, writer, music composer, editor, font illustrator, editor of children's books, and have this whole career. And I believe a lot of his some of the money that sustained him and his family actually came from his writing. He was a very prolific writer as well, and his short stories are very famous. So a lot of what sustained him as an artist came from his books as well as films.
One of the movies that you chose was I don't know, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong.
Charulata, yes.
It's believed to be his favorite film, and it's one of the movies you picked to show. Why was this his favorite movie, and why did you choose this to be shown? And also, I think after he made this movie, his career went in a different direction where he started making fantasy movies and sci-fi movies. So why does this movie have so much impact?
So to him, the film was his personal favorite. I think he saw it as a film in which he made the least mistakes, according to himself, by his own view, because every artist wants to, refine this, edit that, this music better, etc., endlessly, right? So he thought this was relatively as perfect as one could get in his own personal opinion. But to me, it's also very, very, very modern film, very feminist, and totally a film of today, even though it was made like maybe about 60 years or much more. But so I think to me, it's very feminist and humanist because he's addressing a married woman's literary, so artistic and romantic desires. She's married, but, having a kind of a crush on someone else. So there is this married couple where the husband is a very busy newspaper editor and he has no time for his wife. And he wants his wife to go out into the world and, be, and she's also very well read.
He's a nice guy.
He's a lovely guy. He's a very lovely guy. Not at all.
Very supportive.
Very supportive. He's aware that he's not giving his wife enough time, so he invites his cousin who kind of has a literary bent of mind, and he knows his wife is also likes to read stuff. She reads voraciously. To hang out with her and encourage her. He briefs his cousin to encourage his wife to write because he wants her to be more accomplished and he knows she has it in her. So he actually invites his cousin over, but she falls in love with the cousin, Amal, right, who's played by this insanely gorgeous actor, Soumitra Chatterjee, whom I have an eternal crush on. But I think half the women in South Asia have a crush on him and maybe elsewhere in the world. But what is interesting is how Ray, so there is this exquisite scene which to me tells me so much. So Subrata Mitra, this legendary cinematographer, is famous for what is called the establishing 10 minutes of the film, which show you how lonely she is and walking around with opera glasses in her own house, etc., which is, of course, justly famous. There is a swing scene where you see this incipient romance between her and Amal in the garden, and she's on the swing, which is, again, very tenderly in a song suggesting that this romance is happening, and yet ending in a very poignant way. But what I really like, and which is to be an explosively emotional scene without actually overdoing it, is what I call the pan scene. Pan, of course, is a leaf which is a digestive kind of thing which Indians and South Asians love to eat. But and just for time pass, not necessarily after dinner, but just generally, just a chewy, like our
snack.
classy equivalent. No, classy equivalent of chewing gum, I would say. It's not even a snack. It's just a munchification. But so they're all fond of eating pan, and so Amal gets something published that he wrote, which she has been encouraging him to write, and he gets something published, and she gets kind of very jealous that he wrote something, and she also wants to write, and he's also been encouraging her. So she secretly sends off something she wrote to a publisher, doesn't tell anybody, and it comes published, right? So when it gets published, she whacks him on the head with the magazine in which it's published. She says, see, it's my name, Charulata, and I've got published. She's a kind of, okay, now we are quits, right? Like he got published and she also got published. So she says, see. So she's showing off that, hey, I also got published. And he's stunned and he says, oh my God, but this is beautiful stuff. This is wonderful. And I was so naive and I was asking you to write about your village, but this is magnificent writing. And she goes off in a fury. It's very interesting, that scene. So there's a pan down there, which is a pan box. She shows him the pan and she hurls the pan out of the window. Then she storms up to her room, makes him a fresh pan, offers him the pan, and promises. So for me, the way she expresses her love for him is by promising never to write again. And that scene is so explosive for me because it's telling me that the only way a woman can succeed in her own ambitions as an artist is by snuffing out her talent in order to keep her love. Because she feels that her talent will come between her in her love affair. It'll be a thorn that he will now resent that she's a writer. So there's a lot of very delicate unspoken things. It's all unspoken. It's all hidden.
I didn't think of it that way.
It's for me explosive. Right. Because she knows that, because he tells her this is wonderful and you must never stop writing. He tells her you must never stop writing. No, at the beginning of this scene, he tells her this is marvelous stuff. You should never stop writing. And her response is to give him the pan and promise him that I will never write again. So it's so much, how acutely Satyajit Ray understood a woman's heart and her feelings and her absolute surety, that her accomplishments would make him insecure and it will ruin their romance. And everyone knows that men are generally, as a race in general, insecure about women who are very beautiful, accomplished, in control of their lives, who go about fulfilling their own destinies. They can't handle it, they become insecure. They cannot handle it. So it makes them insecure. It could be very, very subconscious. Even for a very nice guy, it could be subconscious, which he's not aware of. And she knew that. And what she does is to fling the book away. This is her first published magazine, but she flings it away because she knows it's going to be a thorn in their relationship. It is an exquisite scene.
And it's what you just did. You critic helped me even see more which I didn't see.
Just beautiful.
One of the things that he does at the end of the movie is that he uses, which I've never seen before, he uses freeze frame. To me, that was the first time I've ever seen that. What is the meaning of that?
So I think it's many things. Now, I can't remember offhand, but I would imagine the freeze frame, which a lot of, I'm not some world authority on film cinema, I just know a bit, but I can't remember, but I would imagine Truffaut's Quatre Cinq Coups, 400 Blows was before that, which had a famous freeze frame at the end, as well as a very, very classic kind of freeze frame at the end. And also a kind of fourth wall breaking thing where the young boy who's the protagonist, Jacques Douanel, I think, something Douanel, turns around and looks at the camera, and there's a freeze frame when he's at the beach and he stares at camera, kind of accusing us of, he's kind of a delinquent kid and he's staring at us as being responsible for his situation, in a way, all very classy, without words. So for me, this freeze frame where the husband finds out that Charulata had a crush on or / was having an affair with Amal, his own cousin, whom he actually brought to encourage her, but who kind of, so there's multiple betrayals there. So his brother-in-law, who is his wife Charulata's own brother, betrays him by running off with the family money. Then Charulata, his wife, betrays him, and his own cousin betrays him by having an affair with his wife. So there's 3 betrayals all at the same time, which is very hard for him to handle by 3 people who are very close to him. But also, so then he goes off. He goes mad and he just kind of goes for a ghoda gadi, a ride on a horse car, just to, get some fresh air and clarify. Just to settle his thoughts a bit and his heart a bit. And when he comes back, so she says, "Aisho," so she says, "Come in." So it's this very kind of awkward silence because, she knows that he knows about the betrayal, and then she says, "Aisho," which has come in and holds her hand out to him. And he very tentatively puts his hand out towards her hand, but it stops just short and it's frozen there as a freeze frame. So it's a reconciliation of sorts, but there will always be that betrayal between them. It's saying so much without any dialogue. So for me, the greatest scenes in cinema are always those without dialogues. The ones that you remember forever are those without dialogues, right? Because each of us can make of it what we will. But it's kind of, so they're moving towards a reconciliation, but that betrayal will always there between them, that kind of stuff like that,
For me, the movie was so sophisticated because there was no binary character. There was nobody you can hate.
Exactly.
These days, you hate the husband is abusive.
You're so right.
It's okay for her to do that. But now it's he's nice, she's nice, that guy's nice.
So that's one of the great things about Ray, and I love it. So in one of his interviews, he said he found villains boring. He found it too boring to make a black and white, that's the guy you hate. Because that's how humans are, right? So even in the worst guys, there are some redeeming things. On the nicest guys, there can be some not very nice things, nobody's perfect, right? So to acknowledge the humanity in everybody and understand that even someone like Amal, who is such an adorable fellow and a mischievous nutcase whom we all fall in love with, he also found it hard to control his feelings, but was careful not to cross the line. And he rather left than betray, his own cousin. So about how a lot of us are on the borderline a lot of the times, and it's very hard to draw that line and not cross a border where we might hurt somebody in order to fulfill our desires. Yeah.
All right, I got two questions.
Yeah.
So we have to make this quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the legacy that Ray left behind? Right? Did it make an effect or an impact on Hindi film cinema now? Because I grew up in the 90s and I just know, I thought the Three Kings were the first and top of everything.
Yeah.
So I was surprised to learn about him as I got older, but did he kind of change India and allowed more of these kind of movies to come in, or did it just go back to commercial type movies?
You're absolutely right. So he did, as I said, he's a pioneer of the paddle cinema movement of the 1950s. And not only him, but a whole lot of others, including Mrinal Sen, Ritik Ghatak, many, many, many filmmakers in Bengal, but also elsewhere in the country. Adur Gopal Krishnan, there was so many others, right? So Jabbar Patel in many different languages, Janu Barua. So all of these people were part of a larger paddle cinema movement, which was about art house independent films. And at that time, some of it was supported by the government as well, the National Film Development Corporation of India, NFDC. But a lot of, India, 95 or 99% of the industry is private, which is why it is so resilient and has, outlasted, not outlasted in numbers, far more prolific than Hollywood. Hollywood, they barely make about 700 feature films a year. India makes about 2,500 feature films a year and minimum 5,000 films on average if you include documentary shots and everything. So it's it's the number one most prolific industry in the world. So I think Ray's contribution, but also of all of his contemporaries, the parallel cinema movement, also including, for example, Shyam Menegal, Govind Nihalani, many others like that, they open up the gates to another kind of cinema, which can be realistic, which can have non-actors, which can be in rural settings or in poverty, but can be extremely artistic and just give you a lot of food for thought, other than beauty and, truth and beauty, I would say, as against the masala, happy romance and, very predictable formula that is also so insanely successful of the masala template of Bollywood. But I think that legacy continues because we don't have that clear-cut distinction, which was, that is masala and this is art house. And there's been a lot more middle ground in between, what I call Mindi cinema, which is mainstream plus indie. So mainstream cinema has also become a little more realistic. So you have films like Kapoor and Sons, which has big stars like Alia Bhatt and, Siddharth, etc. But also, full-on chart-busting, floor-burning numbers. But also realistic things about LGBT issues, about your parents having extramarital affairs. So very realistic issues as well as films, art house films also having more mainstream elements, with song and dance or so. But so I love this because Ray tried to. So one of the films we include of Ray, which is called Nayak, meaning the hero. So he tried to go more mainstream, which I found is so classy. Even when he tried to get mainstream, he was so classy. So he had Uttam Kumar, who was the reigning Bengali star for decades and decades, and Sharmila Tagore, whom he had actually discovered in Teen Konna, his Three Daughters, which was one of his early works, where he had discovered her as an actress, as almost a child actress. But by then, she had already gone to Bollywood and become a big Bollywood star with Kashmir Ki Kali and Anupama and a whole lot of other films. And he invited her back to be Nayak. So he was having this Bollywood star and this Bengali star in Nayak, the hero. So he tried to go mainstream elements, but of course it remained very much in the indie art house space. And also in Jalsaghar, which is one of the most exquisite films, The Music Room, he tried to go more mainstream, quote unquote, by having song and dance, but he was so classical by using, very classical Hindustani music and Kathak, which is a classical Indian dance. Even when he used commercial elements, they were just so classy and indie. So,
do you think there's, with India currently, do you think there's space for another Ray?
I don't think he's never had a clear-cut inheritor of his mantle, so to speak. But I think his works have imbued many, many, many artists, including the ones I've included in this, including Amit Datta and Anik Datta. But a whole lot of filmmakers, if you talk to them, they all say that they owe Ray a lot. So it might be a very subconscious influence, even if it isn't very explicit. But there's no question that nas mein, rag mein hai. He's like in our breaths and in our bones and in our blood, which is a very rich legacy, I think, so many decades on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. This was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Asan. Really a delight being with you. Thank you so much.